I'm Lisa Pritchard. On behalf of the entire library staff, welcome and thank you for coming out in an afternoon. We are delighted to have our speaker here today. I have a couple things to tell you. If you require proof of attendance, that will be available after the talk at the circulation desk. You can pick those up. And I would like to welcome Dr. Holzer, who's going to introduce our speaker. Dr. Holzer is with the History Department, and he is responsible for this event today. So thank you all for coming, and Dr. Holzer, if you'll make the introductions, that would be great.
Thank you all for coming. I appreciate everyone's interest in the topic. Mikko Saikku is a leading environmental historian. He's been at the University of Helsinki for the last 25 years or so. That's rough, but he's been doing it for quite a while. One of the things we do in history is when we introduce each other, we often give like a little genealogy of their background. It's kind of like an academic quirk, but the big thing is like who you studied with. And so this graduate student long ago came from Helsinki to Lawrence, Kansas to study with Donald Worster, who is the environmental historian, one of the founders of environmental history in the United States. And for those of you that have come across some of his works, he wrote the iconic book on the Dust Bowl, Nature's Economy, that lays out all the themes of environmental history back in the 1970s. And so, in a sense, Professor Saikku is the second generation of this newly found field. And since I'm talking about Donald Worster, I do have to recommend, he wrote one of his last great works on John Wesley Powell, who was a veteran of the Civil War and lost his right arm at Shiloh. And he did not, very, very similar to many of the tragedies we see with some of our war veterans today, but he was the head of the U.S. Geological Society and went down the Green River and the Grand Canyon River one-armed. He started with a crew of 10 and ended up with a crew of 5. It is an incredible story, just basically in a giant rowboat, for those of you who like to river raft. He also, before the Civil War, rode from Pittsburgh to St. Louis, for those of you that are interested in boating experience. The other thing I'd like to say about Mikko before I introduce him was a couple years ago, as his position in environmental history was becoming recognized, he got the opportunity to accept an award for a colleague, but it was another person from the founding generation of environmental historians. Alfred Crosby was going to be given a Lifetime Achievement Award but couldn't attend for health reasons, so he was selected. He had done some work with Alfred Crosby, and for anybody who's taken a history class, if you've ever dealt with the Columbian Exchange or the influenza epidemic of World War I, that was Alfred Crosby's work that you were probably citing. So it was a really neat experience where the torch was kind of being passed from the one generation to the next. And Dr. Saikku has written on the Mississippi Delta, one of the most interesting ecological regions in the United States. Mankind's attempt to tame this wild land has also led to the production of Agent Orange in the Vietnam War. Basically, it was a cotton exfoliant that we used to apply in Southeast Asia. My favorite work by Mikko is Home in the Big Forest, which is about the decline of the ivory-billed woodpecker. And for those of you that are interested in biology, it was a great example of the decline of this ecologically sensitive area and how this magnificent woodpecker, which was basically the size of a red-tailed hawk, has been driven to extinction. Kind of sort of a canary in the coal mine story. But I know you came from Mikko and I could keep talking, so I will turn it over to you, Dr. Saikku.
Thanks, Scott. I try to live up to the introduction. I'm not sure if I can do that, but it gives me great pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Scott and Lisa for having me, and the library staff, and all of you attending this, and of all, the first day of the turkey season, I heard, so I'm that's really pretty nice. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I happened to be around. I was attending the Organization of American Historians conference in St. Louis last week, and so this was a nice opportunity to visit friends here in Hillsborough. And I'd like to give you, I mean, my talk this is going to be a pretty loosely structured talk. It's connected to my current book project, which is about wilderness and landscape and hunting, fishing, and masculinity, comparing North America and Northern Europe. And obviously that is a huge topic, and I will just have a little time to sort of skim the surface here. But I think what I would like to do today is to give you an idea about, I mean, the stereotypical ideas about hunting in Europe, the stereotypical ideas about hunting in North America, but also make the case that, I mean, not all of these stereotypes are true, and especially when it comes to Northern Europe, our own experience in Finland, Sweden, Norway, it's quite different from rest of Europe, and actually resembles the American classic experience in many ways. And obviously, I think there are people who are interested in natural sciences, wildlife, and maybe even hunters themselves. So I hope we will have some time. I try to keep this in about 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and if you are interested in asking questions about hunting in Northern Europe or anything like that, I'd be happy to at least try to answer your questions. But yeah, I mean, I would like to say in the beginning that I'd like to present the sort of a classic ideas about hunting culture in Europe and hunting culture in North America, and then sort of try to challenge some of these and try to show you that European experience is not that uniform that Americans often think that it is. Yeah, please, next slide. And also, I mean, can everybody hear me? Okay? Okay, great. And also, I try to start slow because I have a pretty strong Finnish accent, and it'll probably take you a little while to get used to it, but I think we'll be okay by the end of the talk. Okay, and here's our setting. So we're going to compare North America and Europe, and then the Nordic countries over here. And actually, I love this projection of the world because obviously, once we get to talk about the different species that people hunt in North America and in Northern Europe, you actually see that many of these species are circumpolar, and the distance is not that great actually. So yeah, I mean that'll be one thing that you should keep on mind. Okay, next one. And also some of the central concepts that you always associate with the American experience would be, of course, the frontier and the wilderness experience. And I think most Central Europeans, Western Europeans, and most Americans always think about Europe as lacking, you know, the frontier experience after antiquity. But as I would like to show you later on, that's not really the case. So in the Nordic countries, we have something similar to the American frontier experience, and that has a lot to do with the history and culture of hunting in the Nordic countries. I'd also like to point out, I mean, if any of you are interested in the cultural history of hunting in the U.S., an excellent book came out about almost 15 years ago by Daniel Justin Herman, Hunting and the American Imagination. Has anyone over here read it? Okay, but that's something, I don't know if you have it in the library, but maybe Lisa, you should get that one. But it's actually an excellent introduction to the history of hunting in the US. Okay, next one. Okay, and let's go to the stereotypes about hunting. And of course, if we think about, you know, the great American heroes of the 19th century, we think about frontiersmen who were also hunters. And sort of the ideal males of the 19th century would include people like Daniel Boone and David Crockett. And also, I mean, their legacy has lived on, you know. Probably many of the audience, actually you could, you know, David Crockett was shown on Finnish TV in the 1960s. I vaguely remember that. So I mean, it is a very interesting phenomenon. So you have these celebrated American hunting heroes, and they are known all over the world. But if you think about Europe, I mean, and sort of a common man, hunter, frontiersman, and a folk hero, are there any European, hunter heroes, folk heroes? Can you think of any?
William Tell.
Okay, we would have William Tell. Okay. I think there's one even more sort of a. Well, let's go to the next one. We would have Robin Hood, but William Tell would be a sort of a same thing. I would say that most European countries, in Western, Central, and Southern Europe, they would have some sort of a hunting folk hero. But the interesting thing about that is that, I mean, if you compare these hunting heroes of most European cultures to the American hunting heroes, there is a big difference. And what would that be? I think the
setting, the wilderness versus.
Yeah, you would have the wilderness setting. I mean, these people are inside civilization, but also I think, and the biggest thing is that all of these persons are outlaws. I mean, they are not working for the establishment or the government. They are actively persecuted by the government. So there is you can see there's something going on in here, and that has to do with the history and culture of hunting in Europe. So all of these, some of them are mythical, like Robin Hood, but Dick Turpin or the Matthias Klostermaier from Bavaria, who was a great folk hero in German culture in the 18th century. These are all people who become outlaws because they have been poaching, and that's why they fall outside the law. Next, please. And that brings us to the stereotypical hunting in Europe. And of course, hunting and especially hunting of big game has a long history as the prince's pastime. Actually, I don't know what is the history of your stairway here in this library, but it shows Assyrian princes hunting lion. So it goes back a long way, and it has been that way for millennia. But what happened in Europe, I mean, and I'm making generalizations here, and please feel free to make comments on my generalizations. But the sort of a stereotypical thing about European hunting is that during the Middle Ages, hunting rights become separated from land ownership. And what happens is that the ruling classes, the monarchs, the nobility, they become the only people who can hunt. And hunting big game hunting especially has always been in Europe and in the Middle East. It has been a ritualized thing, but it really become so highly ritualized in late medieval and early modern Europe that it's really hard to even comprehend from today's perspective. But what is important is that even though, I mean, of course, majority of the people are peasants who are in their condition is very, very poor, but even small landowners, they cannot hunt on their own land. So it's all reserved for the nobility's pastime, and obviously, hunting big game on horseback and with hounds, and without paying any attention to crops and things like that. I mean, you can understand how hated hunting as a concept becomes in Europe. And of course, I mean, it becomes a sort of a ritualized display of power in Europe. So if you can hunt, if you can hunt big game, I mean, you are somebody, and you show your power. And obviously, I mean, if we look at this, for example, Jagdschloss Granitz in Rügen, Germany, you can see, I mean, that's not your basic hunting lodge or hunting cabin. if you think about that, with the decorations of the red deer that the princes have killed over the years and so on. So it's not a common man's experience at all. And of course the way that the hunt is carried out in medieval and early modern Europe is typically the par-force hunting, which means hunting on horseback. And originally British and German and French hunters, they pursue red deer is the sort of the game for them. But once red deer, for example, in Great Britain become rarer and rarer, especially in England, the people have to turn into to something else, and that's really the founding of modern fox hunting. So fox hunting is sort of a modern version of medieval and early modern par-force hunting. But it, very, very elite and so on. And of course, I mean, if the commoners want to hunt in medieval or if they happen to hunt in medieval or early modern Europe, they are poaching, and if they get caught, I mean, it's going to be pretty bad. So it is usually punishable by death if you poach the king's deer or so on. So you can see there's very there are a lot of meanings that are projected into hunting. And also hunting becomes, I mean, it is not a wilderness experience. It's not a really, it has not much to do with woodsmanship or woodcraft or anything like that. Most of the game that is hunted is raised to be hunted by the king and the nobility at that later time. And also what is important is that the peasants and the small landowners, they are made to drive the hunted animals. So I mean, that's yet another burden to these people who cannot hunt on their own land, but they are still made assistants to the king's or prince's hunt. So you can see, I mean, the common person in Europe really doesn't appreciate hunting that much. It's a symbol of all the wrongs in the society. So you can see, I mean, how much cultural baggage there is with that. And next one, please. And these are the sort of a typical big game species that have been hunted in Europe for centuries. And all of these were, by let's say 16th, 17th century, these are reserved only for the nobility. You would have the red deer, which is pretty close to the elk of the West, a little bit smaller. Then you have the roe deer, a small deer species about the size of a white-tailed calf or fawn, and the fallow deer and the wild boar. So these are the most important mammalian species that are hunted in Europe. The next one, please. But there's also, of course, I won't go into duck hunting. I mean, if somebody wants to ask about duck hunting, I can take questions on that, even though I'm not an expert on that. But upland bird hunting in Europe is also very much a sort of a class thing. I mean, especially since the early 19th century, when we start to get the modern shotgun and hunting upland birds with shotguns and trained dogs. I mean, that becomes a big thing in much of Europe, and it is also a rich man's pastime, as you can imagine. Of course, what is interesting for you guys, well, I don't think you have. Do you have any Hungarian partridges over here? They have a lot in the West, and I suppose you don't have too many pheasants either in Missouri. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, of course, during the 19th century, some of these European species are introduced to North America. And of course, the red grouse or the sort of a Scottish subspecies of the willow ptarmigan, that is the sort of a classical upland bird species hunted in Great Britain on hunting estates, using Holland shotguns and people driving the game towards the hunters. So I mean, it's sort of a continuation of this medieval hunting in late 19th and even today. I mean, it's so there's definitely you can see the sort of a continuity of the medieval hunt even today if you go to places like Great Britain or France. The next one, please. Okay, and as you can imagine, I mean, once European migrants get to North America, I mean, it is a whole different story for people coming from Western Europe and landing to North America. Even though, I mean, hunting may be nominally tied to land ownership over here in North America, in practice, I mean, there's so much land and it's so wild. The frontiers moving all the time and so on. So people are more or less free to hunt whatever they want, however they want, and all that. And you really must remember that it has great symbolic value for many European people, and I think that is something that we really should study more. There's not that much, sort of a serious hunting history that has been carried out, especially let's say in Nordic countries, but also in North America it has only lately taken off. So I mean, as a subject for serious study of history, I mean, not for history buffs, but for serious academic history, because I think many of the things of class and access to resources and things like that, they really come into focus with hunting. So you have a lot of common land that can be utilized by everyone in North America. So it is a democratic experience. I mean, anyone can hunt, and that is very important for many of the settlers. And of course, during the colonial era, but especially after the U.S. becomes independent, the hunting experience gains more and more sort of a national value. I mean, it becomes symbolic of the U.S. I mean, we would have, in the 19th century, people like Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett, they become celebrated heroes and sort of national symbols. And I mean, part of their allure is that they are woodsmen, hunters, and so on, and they become one with the landscape, and also symbolize the democratic experience of America. And you can see, I mean, probably you in the back won't see it too well, but I mean, there's quite a difference between the European hunting experience and hunting experience in North America during the late 18th century. Next, please. Okay, so I mean, American landscape painting, I mean, becomes very important for the construction of national identity. But you often have these celebrated hunting figures that show up in American landscape painting. And of course, if you think about American literature, I mean, Natty Bumppo, or the Leatherstocking novels by James Fenimore Cooper, one of the first great American novelists, I mean, they celebrate this hunter hero as a symbol of the American experience. So this is quite a difference compared to the European experience in many ways. Next, please. And of course, one fascinating thing is that, I mean, Europeans find, I mean, and of course during this whole talk I'm talking about, Euro-American and European experience. We just don't have time to go to any of the other things. So, but I would mention that Europeans are fascinated by the North American mammals. They are typically somewhat bigger than the ones you will find in Europe, but they are still, something that they they look pretty familiar, and hunting them is in many ways it's not that different, and the species look the same. And of course we have the whitetail, and farther west for big game you would have the elk or wapiti, and of course bison and all these species. But you are so familiar with them, so I won't go into any detail. Next, please. And of course, I mean, the wild turkey is pretty interesting for Europeans. I mean, they haven't seen anything like that, especially people coming from Central or Western Europe. They don't have anything equivalent to the wild turkey. So I mean, that huge bird that is highly edible, it's quite a revelation for many Europeans. On the other hand, you have some species that are very similar to the European upland birds, like the ruffed grouse. I think that just extends to Missouri. Do you have it here?
What?
The ruffed grouse.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Not many, some.
But yeah. Okay. So it's very similar to the European hazel hen, and of course the bobwhite quail. I mean, it's pretty similar to the European common quail. Next, please. Okay, but what does all of that I have said so far, what this has to do with the Northern European experience? And now I'd like to turn on your attention to the variability in the European experience, because I think when most Europeans and most North Americans think about the European experience, they equate that with Western and Central European experience. But I'd like to be a sort of a point out that the experience is in some ways is very different in Western and Northeastern part of Europe. In the Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, what are today Norway, Sweden and Finland. Not so much in Denmark, which is very close to Germany. It's been densely populated for hundreds and thousands of years. But the sparsely populated northern Nordic countries or areas, I mean, they have some things that I would argue that make much of their sort of a cultural experience quite similar to North America in many ways, and that actually manifests itself also even in hunting culture. So that's something that I would like to point out next. And for example, one thing is that much of this area was tied within the sort of a European core culture only around year 1000 or so. That's not that long ago. So you would have, the southern parts of Norway, southern parts of Sweden, they are connected with Central Europe and Western Europe. But the northern parts of Norway, Sweden, and Finland, I mean, they are inhabited by the local tribes, and I mean, they are not Christians until 12th century or something like that, and so it is very different from much of Europe. And of course, what is I think very interesting is that the Swedish kingdom, when it starts to form, really become a sort of a European power since the 12th and 13th centuries. Part of the deal is that they want to settle this area so the Russians won't get it. And as a result, we have a sort of a frontier movement, for example, in Finland since the 16th century. So much of the country is populated only up to this level, but since the 16th century, there's this conscious effort to populate the whole of the country and displace the Aboriginal people, the Sami people. So you can see you have this sort of a wilderness area that is populated. There's a frontier that moves north in Finland and in northern Norway and Sweden, and so you have this sort of a wilderness experience, frontier experience taking place. And what is also very interesting, and that's, I would argue, it has to do with the sparse population, is that over in what is today Finland or what is today Sweden, the commoners never lose their right to hunt. I mean, and that is a great contrast to the rest of Europe, I would say. So even during the era when Sweden is a major European power in the 17th century, you have a lot of new noble families, a lot of money coming into Sweden. Swedes trying to make Sweden more like rest of Europe and pick up all sorts of European customs, and including hunting the way Central Europeans or Western Europeans do. So they try to take off the commoners' hunting rights, but they really are not able to enforce that in what is today Finland or northern Sweden. So you would have the folk hunting tradition that continues in these areas. So it's not that different really from North America in many ways. So that is a great difference between the Nordic countries and rest of Europe. Next, please. And I'll just show these couple of things just to. You don't have to remember their names or dates or anything like that, but you can see that, I mean, our wilderness settlement and frontier experience, for example, in Finland, I mean, it's pretty late phenomenon. It only started in the mid 16th century, and it's completed by, let's say, well, mid 19th century. So it's not that far removed from the American experience. And the guy on the right-hand side, that Gustav III, and he's the king of Sweden in late 18th century, and he allies with the farmers and the sort of common people to fight the nobility for his own power. And one of his sort of a most important legislative acts is the so-called Union and Security Act, and part of this thing is that he guarantees the commoners' right to hunt on their own land. So it is an important issue for people in Sweden and Finland at the time, and the king guarantees the commoners' right to hunt. Next, please. And here we have I'm using a Finnish example. You could probably use Sweden as well, and even Norway, although Norwegian topography is somewhat different. And that has an influence. But I just love comparing, showing these two maps, because you can see the results of the frontier movement in North America. It goes from east to west, and it's out in the west where you have most of public land. What happens in Finland, it goes from south to north, and this is where you have all the public land. And also issues with native peoples that haven't really been solved even today. Next, please. And I'm going to show you a couple of images, give you a couple of names. You don't have to remember them, but just to give you an idea that this celebration of wilderness culture, sort of a frontier culture, I mean, it's not unique to the United States or Canada. We also have that in Europe. And in Finland, for example, our national poet, I mean, his first, this is really the sort of a first Finnish, acclaimed collection of poems, and it's about moose hunters. And these are commoners hunting moose. And I mean, that is completely unthinkable in sort of a basic, generic European culture. Next, please. And also the sort of a great Finnish novel. I mean, that's about these 7 brothers who go out in the wilderness and they hunt. I mean, that is also something very sort of un-European, you could say. Next, please. And also, if we think about Daniel Boone or David Crockett, I mean, much of Finnish identity is based, you could say, the sort of a construction of Finnish identity during the 19th century. It's based on some of the works by Zacharias Topelius, and he wrote this book that was used in every Finnish school in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And one of the few people who's celebrated in that book is Martti Kitunen, who's the great bear hunter who killed like 200 bears and made central Finland safe for settlement and agriculture. So that's not that different really. Next please. And you also have that in Finnish landscape painting and art, the same sort of a celebration. If we think about Albert Bierstadt and Thomas Moran and celebration of the Rocky Mountains and wilderness landscape, you would have the same exact thing in the Nordic cultures. Nordic landscape painting in the 19th century is very important for national identity. You have the celebration of wilderness images, but also of the wilderness hunters. So here you have lynx hunters tracking lynx. Next one, please. But it's also sort of interesting, and you can make comparisons with the US. If you think about Theodore Roosevelt's writings at the turn of the century, one of his arguments is that, I mean, why middle-class American men should hunt is that they should be fluent in woodcraft, and being hunters they would become excellent soldiers. And that is the same thing is going on in Nordic countries. And they also draw from the past. So over here you would have these ancient Finns, from I don't know, around year 1000 hunters, but they also actively, scouting for Russians. And you can see that image also in later on. So I mean, you have this hunter figure that is easily turned into a warrior or military figure, and that's celebrated also in North America, but also in the Nordic countries. Next, please. Okay, and the Nordic countries and North America even share some big game species that are hunted, and of course the moose, which is very confusingly called elk in British English, and that's why Theodore Roosevelt always said that Americans should call elk wapiti. Use the Indian Native American word for that, because it is confusing. But if you go to Europe and somebody talks about elk, they really mean what is moose over here. Then of course we have the caribou or the reindeer, what it is called in Eurasia. So I mean it is the same species. The caribou is a different subspecies of Rangifer tarandus. So I mean they are the same species. And, so those are for Nordic countries. Those would be the sort of classic big game species for Nordic hunters. Next, please. And as for upland birds, we would have the hazel hen or hazel grouse, and this would be really close to the ruffed grouse, as you can see. And then we have some of these pretty spectacular species that you don't have in North America. The black grouse, and especially the wood grouse or capercaillie, which is the sort of a European equivalent of turkey. I mean, it's not as big as turkey, but pretty close. I mean, it can be well over 10 pounds. Up to 15 in some cases, almost up to 15. So you can imagine. And what is actually very interesting is that if you think about class and access to hunt, the capercaillie on top of this one, I mean, that would be a great example. There is a small population of these birds still in mountains of Central Europe, and it's extremely coveted species for hunters. I mean, and it is a rare species, and to be able to hunt capercaillie in let's say Germany or Austria, you got to be extremely rich to do that. And it's sort of a symbol of that you have made it. You know, a German CEO always has a stuffed capercaillie in his office, so it has this enormous significance for Central European hunters. Whereas in Sweden, Norway, Finland, or Russia, I mean, anybody can go out and shoot capercaillie and for eating, not for trophy purpose. So that is a good example, I think. of the difference between the Nordic countries and Central Europe. And next, please. Well, we won't go into detail. I mean, if somebody's interested in hunting techniques and things like that, there's a long tradition of in the Nordic countries of common people hunting with dogs and especially with Spitzes. I mean, those are the sort of traditional. So the sort of traditional way to hunt birds in the Nordic countries would be a man and his dog. I mean, of course nowadays it can be a woman and a dog, but I mean it's very much a sort of a solitary wilderness experience. You go to hunt for capercaillie with your dog. Oh, and also many of these dogs can also be used for moose hunting. So they sort of a baying dogs. They stop the moose and the hunter is able to sneak closer and kill the moose. And also even for bear hunting. And actually one of these Finnish species, the Karelian bear dog, I think it's actually used in Colorado to drive away problem grizzlies. So they've imported some in the US for that purpose. So they would stop the grizzly, and then the game warden would shoot the grizzly with rubber bullets and make an aversion to human. And next, please. And like in the US, I mean, all the Nordic countries have this tradition of adventure literature and sort of a historical wilderness and frontier novels. So I mean, with us with Finns, I mean, there's a lot of this stuff that celebrates the frontier experience, the wilderness experience, the hunting experience. With us, of course, it also has the sort of a war against Russians dimension that you guys don't have in your national literature. But it is very common in the 19th century and throughout the 20th century, and also for boys' literature. I mean, you could say that probably 90% of Finnish boys' adventure literature written before 2000 is about going out in the wilderness. Please, next one. So to conclude, I would say that there are some I mean, the stereotypes about European and American experience. I mean, the stereotypes always they have some solid foundings, but I would really like to make the case that the European experience is far from uniform, and as always, we should think about. I mean, shouldn't make too broad generalizations, and of course. What is also interesting, I talk about the amount of public lands in the US and in Finland, but you can also see that if you think about protection of nature and the protection of endangered species, you would have the national parks and those areas in the American West and in the Finnish and Swedish and Norwegian North, and that is where the sort of old frontier and wilderness culture is still celebrated today. So you can see, I hope I've made my case that there is some similarities between the North American and Nordic experience that you may not have known before. Thank you. And yeah, I'm ready. Yeah, please, sir.
One of your slides mentioned the Sami people. Do you see them as a good parallel to the Native Americans in the Northern American experience?
Well, okay, that would take a lecture course to answer, but yeah, you can say that actually, if you can go down with that one, yeah, this one. Okay, so. It's more complicated than over here, because I mean, what is today, for example, Finland or Sweden? You have the Sami people who are somewhat related to, let's say, Finns, and they were settled all over this place, and only by let's say year 1000, I mean, you would have ethnic Finns only on the southern coast. And they would make excursions to the wilderness to hunt for meat and furs and to fish. But the Sami people would live up there. But since mid 16th century, they are gradually pushed back. I mean, it is a sort of a similar thing. I mean, they are pushed back like the Native Americans in North America, but the experience is not as violent, and there's a lot of intermarriage, and you know, there's not that, the racial difference is not that big. So I mean, it's a more peaceful process, but it is a sort of a similar process. And of course, we still have the Sami people in the very northernmost north today, and many of the issues that surround their land-owning rights, they're very similar to the issues that you have in North America. So I mean, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a resemblance there. Please.
The capercaillie, you said it's rare now in Europe, or just?
Well, it's very rare in Central Europe, in the mountains, but it's not doing too well in much of Nordic countries either.
Is there anything that anybody's doing for rehab or not rehab, conservation efforts, trying to bring back their habitat?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that, I mean, of course, you know, modern forestry is very important for all the Nordic countries. There's a lot of, you know, pine and spruce plantations and uniform forest, and often very young forest, and I mean, that's not good habitat for capercaillie. So they are not doing too well, and of course, with the climate change also, I mean, that has created some issues for many of the species. But yeah, it's a spectacular bird, as you could see from that photo. I mean.
Have you ever got to hunt them?
I'm not much of a bird hunter. I'm really more of a fisherman, but I do hunt moose every year, and I mean, that's actually maybe something that I could share with you. Is this sort of it's somewhat different, and well, actually, can you go back to, let's see, yeah, the one with the maps. Map of North America and Nordic countries. We have two of. That'll be fine. There we go. Okay. But yeah, as you can see, most of the public land in Finland is in the north, and of course in the US it's in the west. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know Missouri that well, but there is some. Of course, there's some public land, but not that much. Actually, judging from the map, you actually have pretty much public land for the east, but still. But yeah, the problem with many hunters, because it's tied to land ownership, so you have to find a place to hunt, and you have to own some land typically. But the beauty for moose hunting in Finland would be that, you know, there's a lot of forestry going on in Finland, and landowners, they are more than happy to have somebody to hunt moose on their property. Because I mean, they really break havoc to the pine plantations, the young pines. And actually, I mean, it is very interesting. Sort of similar to what has happened over here with white-tailed deer. You have created, with suburbanization, you have created this edge habitat that is perfect for white-tailed deer. And so we have this boom in white-tailed deer numbers. And it's the same way in Nordic countries with the moose, because we created the perfect wintering habitat for moose with pine plantations. So they always have so much food available. And obviously the landowners don't want the moose to eat all their pine saplings, so they're more than happy to let you hunt on their land for free or just a nominal fee. So what typically happens is that you get a group of people, and also you have to have pretty sizable amount of land to be able to hunt moose according to the Finnish law. It's got to be like 2,000 acres, nothing less than that. So many people pull their resources and get the amount of land to be hunted, and it's sort of a communal effort in many ways. It's sort of a typical part of Nordic rural culture is that every village has its moose hunting group, and the guys go out and with their dogs, and you know they always have a sort of a communal celebration, and so on. Please.
Do you still allow the use of the dogs in hunting them or not?
Yeah, it's very common to have you know use dogs in hunting, and the way it works is, I mean, up in Lapland where there's a lot of public land and very few people still do the sort of a classic hunting. You know, one person, one dog. They go out, the dog smells where the moose is, and goes and stops the moose, and the guy sneaks in and kills the moose. But in central and southern Finland, where there are more people and so on, you've got to be more careful. I mean, it's usually conducted in a way that you would have a group of hunters and a dog, and you let the dog out in the forest, and it seeks out the moose and stops the moose, starts barking, and slowly moves the moose around the forest, and the guys have surrounded the area, and eventually it'll come to one of the hunters. Yeah, please.
If you were to hunt a moose, what would be your preferred rifle caliber killers?
Ooh, well, according to the Finnish law, the smallest caliber you can have would be 270. But I mean, that's considered too small. You know, 270 or 655 Swede, I mean, those are the sort of low-end calibers. I would say that probably 75% of Finnish hunters would use 308 or 30-06. I mean, those are the sort of classic calibers for moose hunting in Finland. And of course, our moose is not as big as the Alaska moose. I mean, it's about the same size as the cirrus moose of Rockies.
Did they ever use black powder?
Not really. There's not much of a black powder hunting tradition for hunting. I mean, there are some, you know, reenactors and people, but not. I mean, it wouldn't be illegal, but I mean, I have toyed with the idea of doing that, but I mean, it would be legal, but I mean, yeah. Oh, and once, well, I'm really in a patriotic mood here today, giving you all these stories about Finland, but actually, one really fascinating thing about Finland as only country in Europe is that we have a huntable white-tailed deer population. And it's sort of fascinating because in the 1930s, a bunch of Finnish Americans from Minnesota, they had become, you know, hunters of white-tailed deer, and they thought Finns could use this new species, and they introduced white-tailed deer to Finland in the 30s. And now I think we have a pretty big population in the southern part of the country. So I think they kill about, I don't know, 40,000 whitetails a year. So I mean, it is a pretty big deal.
I didn't know.
Yeah, but it's the old, and of course, I mean, the whitetail deer population in Finland it's expanding, and the Swedes are really concerned about, because I mean, ideas about introducing invasive species, they have changed so much, and you know, the Swedes don't want the whitetail in Sweden. So please.
I remember the fuss immediately post Chernobyl about it. There were parallels drawn between the removal of buffalo from the northern plains being paralleled with the loss of reindeer to the Sami due to radioactive toxification of deer. Are you seeing good rebound of the deer, and also what kind of changes are you seeing in populations due to, as you say, climatic change?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there was definitely, they could monitor that there was a change in you could detect, you know, harmful substances in reindeer meat, and but that has the situation is much better now, but still I would say that probably not a good idea to eat a lot of reindeer liver, for example. I mean, or kidneys. Yeah. So, but they're actually doing quite well the reindeer populations nowadays, even in some ways too well, because I mean they are sort of wreaking havoc at the habitat. There's really too many of them up north.
We're seeing similar things with overgrazing and chronic wasting here in Missouri.
Mhm.
But how are you seeing changes in those populations of wildlife with, as you said, climatic changes that are going on right now?
Okay, well, it's the most problematic. Well, it's in some ways with the reindeer. I mean, the vegetation seems to be changing. I mean, there's yeah. So we are losing some of the lichens and more species that the reindeer utilize. There's a clear trend in there, and especially for the endangered subspecies of reindeer, the forest reindeer, and they are not doing too well. So yeah, that's probably the best example. But also willow ptarmigan and rock ptarmigan. I mean those.
Are you looking at the possibility of managed breeding of some of those groups to help maintain your populations?
Not yet, because we are not there yet. I mean, they are still okay, sorta, but I mean, the trend is not good. Please.
Is it mostly firearms hunting, or do you have like archery popularity like you have over here?
Well, that's interesting about these connections, sort of a modern world and the diffusion of cultures and cultural ideas. And I mean, obviously, I mean there was a long tradition of archery in the Nordic countries, and then black powder hunting, but that died away, with modern firearms at the turn of the century, and it's archery has become popular only in the, let's say, last 15-20 years, and still, I mean, it's you can't hunt, for example, moose. You can't hunt with bow and arrow, and not even whitetail. But roe deer is small enough that you can, according to Finnish law, you can hunt that with a bow. But it's not big yet, but it's getting bigger day by day, I would say. And that's because I mean there's, more, internet, all that. I mean people read the same websites and all that, and yeah, archery is becoming pretty big, I would say. Please.
Ever go out with any falconers?
There really isn't. I mean, yeah, that's something I didn't mention, and thank you for bringing it up. Is of course falconry would have been another sort of a variation of the prince's pastime in medieval Europe, and sort of a very. I mean, of course, there's this traditional falconry in the U.S., sort of a homegrown tradition, and which is anybody who's interested in can do it, and it takes time and skill and all that. But of course, in Europe, it has this history of very elite sport, and in Nordic countries, there wasn't that historical elite, or it was so small that we really don't have any sort of a falconry tradition in the Nordic countries. Fire away. Oh, are we out of questions?
Oh, no. We'll think of more.
Okay, if that's it, okay. Thank you.